Welcome to the YourTown television program. I'm your host, Jeff Kline, and this segment will be taking a look and highlighting some of the students at the Naval Postgraduate School. We'll have segments in the future that will have different students from different curriculum, studying different things from different backgrounds and going different places. But today what I'd like to do is welcome Lieutenant Jeff Steiner. Welcome to the YourTown television program.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Jeff, we start every show, we're going to focus somewhat in this segment about what your research is and what you're studying and that sort of thing.
Okay.
But we'd like to start every show with finding out a little bit more about you. So why did you join the Navy?
Well, sir, I joined because I wanted to do something exciting after college. I'd been toying with the thoughts of joining the military while I was studying. And my older brother, Todd, is actually a senior chief in the Navy. So I had some previous experience with Navy life prior to making the decision. I talked to him about it, and he convinced me to join the Navy and become an officer.
Wow. So we may revisit the fact that your brother's a chief and advise you to become an officer.
But there's been some family struggles with that.
Well, good for that. I'm sure he was very proud of you and been happy to salute you as his brother.
Well, sir, I was at the commissioning of the USS New York, and this was just after I found I was accepted to officer candidate school. He took me into the chief's mess and introduced me as the enemy.
Oh, I see. Well, there you go. You'd set the tone for the rest of your family and your career. That's
Yes, sir.
great. So where did you go to school? Undergraduate school, I'm sorry.
I went to Washington and Jefferson College. It's in southwest Pennsylvania, just south of Pittsburgh.
So are you from Pennsylvania originally?
No, I'm actually from the south side of Chicago, near Joliet, Illinois.
Oh, sure. Well, how did you end up then in Pennsylvania?
Playing water polo.
Oh, is that right? I didn't realize that. What position did you play?
So I was point on offense and hold defense on defense.
Well, the reason I ask that is we have a very robust water polo league here in Monterey. The high schools are very competitive. So for those of them watching, appreciate the fact. Did you play polo in college too?
Yes, sir.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And did you get a chance to in the Navy at all?
Not in the Navy. Mostly in the Navy. I just in my spare time I try to swim, try to stay in shape.
Sure. Well, you have to pass those swim tests.
Yes.
Periodically and that sort of thing. So you went to officer candidate school. You weren't involved in Navy ROTC or the Academy. So where's officer candidate school at?
That's in Newport, Rhode Island. It's beautiful up there, and I'm looking forward to going back for department head school.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about what department head school is here in a little bit. And then where did you go after you graduated from officer candidacy school? You got your commission, and where did you go?
So my first ship was the USS Porter out of Norfolk, Virginia.
And what kind of ship is that?
That's a destroyer.
Okay.
So while I was there, I was the anti-submarine warfare officer, and that person's responsibility is typically anti-submarine warfare. So if you're tracking a submarine, that's a person who is skilled in that warfare area.
Right.
After I was the anti-submarine warfare officer, I became the force protection officer, and their responsibility is preventing terrorism of the forces, of the naval forces. So
when you have that job on a ship, when the ship pulls into port, what do you have to do?
So when you're pulling into port, you have to look at the different requirements from the fleet commander. So not every port's the same, obviously. For example, a port in the U.S. is much different than a port in the Middle East. You have to look at the requirements and figure out what watches you're going to stand up, what your anti-terrorism measures will be, that sort of thing.
Now, those ports are normally surveyed by the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, or NCIS, right?
Yes.
So did you get a chance to talk to any NCIS agents?
Not directly,
Okay.
but I've viewed all those reports prior to pulling in. They give you a wealth of knowledge about the port itself.
Okay, so after your destroyer job, what'd you do?
So after that first job, I went to my second ship, the USS Fitzgerald, out of Yokosuka, Japan, and I was the navigator.
And the Fitzgerald is what type of ship?
It's another destroyer.
Okay, so you went from the East Coast to Japan.
Yeah, a little bit of a change.
Okay, well, I would say so. How did you find Yokosuka, Japan?
Oh, it was amazing. The people there are super friendly, very polite, and luckily, even though we were very busy, I found some time to travel throughout Japan and explore different parts of the country.
Well, besides living and working in Japan, did you get to visit any other interesting ports while you were in the Pacific?
Yes, sir. We actually went to Guam several times. We went to Hong Kong, Da Nang, Vietnam, went to South Korea, went to Australia. So plenty of great port visits.
Wow, and that was an 18-month tour or a 2-year tour?
It actually ended up being closer to 2 years.
Okay. And then you were selected to come to the Naval Postgraduate School.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And what are you studying here?
So here I'm in the National Security Affairs Department. I'm studying Homeland Security and Defense, which really focuses on the Department of Homeland Security and counterterrorism.
Well, were you able to draw on any lessons from your force protection job on the first ship to what you're studying now?
Not directly, but it does help seeing the bigger picture.
Okay. And how do you find your instructors here? Now, realize they're probably going to watch this. So.
They've been great.
Sure they have, because you still have to pass and graduate.
Yeah,
that's right.
Not done with finals yet.
Well, that's wonderful. So what made you decide to come to the Naval Postgraduate School?
Well, I'd heard really great things about it from other officers on board my ships who have gone here previously. They said it's a great chance to really enhance your career. Plus, I'm taking JPME as well to expand my
So
professional
what
knowledge.
is JPME? You're taking JPME. What does that mean?
Oh, JPME is Joint Professional Military Education. So it's looking at how the different branches of the military work together to achieve objectives, or if there's a conflict, how they work together and integrate.
Now, that's actually taught by Naval War College faculty that
Yes, sir.
live here locally in Monterey and provide that instruction to our officers at the postgraduate school. And did you get a chance to write any interesting papers for them?
Nothing terribly interesting for them.
Oh, for them. I'm talking about for you.
Oh, not really, sir. However, one of the professors for Naval War College, Professor McMaster, he's one of my advisors for my thesis. He's been very helpful.
And a longtime resident of Monterey now, and a real contributor to the local community. So I think this may be his last year for teaching too. So
Yeah,
you're one of his last students.
Yeah, he's talking about getting ready to hang it up.
So in your Homeland Security curriculum or Defense and Security that you took in the National Security Affairs,
Yes, sir.
what was your area of research?
So what I'm researching is actually, it has to deal with the surface Navy. I'm looking at how we're trained to operate in a technologically denied environment. So, for example, let's say we lose GPS due to like a cyberspace attack or ASAT technology, anti-satellite technology.
Right.
I'm also looking at
Well, before we go any further, let's reset a little bit of that alphabet soup for some of our
Sorry
people.
about that.
So by losing Global Positioning System, or GPS, what does that mean for a ship?
Well, for example, we use GPS to navigate. If you're in the open ocean, you don't have any landmarks around you to figure out where you're at, and all that water looks the same once you're out there.
Right.
So you need to be able to find out where you're at.
And how would we lose GPS?
So there's quite a few vulnerabilities that GPS has. For example, I mentioned previously a cyberspace attack.
Right. So someone actually attacking from cyber itself in order to prevent signals or something.
Breaking into the network. There's jamming, there's spoofing, there's anti-satellite technology. The ground segments of GPS can be attacked. There's numerous vulnerabilities.
Okay. So we don't have our GPS system, or because either we've lost the satellite system because of conflict, or because there's some sort of cyber attack.
Right.
And you're in the middle of the ocean and you don't know where you're at. What else do you lose? Do you lose anything else if you lose GPS?
So there's other systems that we'd lose, but I don't really want to get into that.
Okay, great. So this is a very important system to have, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, so what does your research tell us? What does it recommend?
So part of what I've looked at is if we're trained on celestial navigation, and there's actually been a significant increase in the amount of training for our surface warfare officers as well as our enlisted sailors over the past few years.
So what is celestial navigation? That's one of the oldest traditions that sailors have.
So celestial navigation, it's basically determining your position using the sun, moon, stars, or planets. And sailors have been using it for hundreds of years effectively to get across the ocean and figure out where they are.
So explain some of that method of how you actually know where you're at based on where the sun is or where the moon is.
Okay, so we have what's called the nautical almanac and also site reduction tables. So what you're doing is you're taking a sextant, which I have with us if we'd like to.
Sure, let's pull out the sextant. This will be great. And what do we do with a sextant?
So we use a sextant for measuring the altitude of a celestial body, such as the sun or moon.
By altitude?
I mean the angle above the horizon.
Oh, okay, so the angle above the horizon. So it's actually just a big protractor thing.
Essentially.
Yeah, okay.
So you measure the angle above the horizon as well as the time. So it's very important to have accurate timepiece. And that was one of the issues with celestial navigation for a long time until John Harrison figured out a way to actually keep time at sea.
Oh, that was many years ago. That was a couple hundred years ago, right? Okay.
Yeah. So you measure the angle of the celestial body, you mark the time, and through the process of sight reduction, you determine any errors in your viewing, and you essentially it's a large math problem, and you get a line of position. So you draw it on a piece of paper, and you don't know where exactly you are on that line of position, but you know you're somewhere on that line.
Right.
So, for example, what you would do is in the morning, take a sight of the sun, do the first line position. A few hours later, do another one, and you advance that first one so you get a fix, so that where they intersect, that's where you're at. And you just keep advancing that throughout the day.
And you keep updating that based on the sun.
Yes, sir.
What if you have no sun and it's cloudy?
Well, if it's cloudy, you've got some issues. But what's great, I mean, you can, with like the noon sight, you can always determine your latitude. Polaris, at nighttime, that's a great star because it always tells you, your latitude.
If you're able to actually
If you're able to see it.
Because those are fixed in the sky is what you're saying. The sun, when it's directly overhead, is a certain indication of local apparent noon, and you're able to compute all the numbers to figure out about where you're at that time. Well, that's great. So why was your research associated with this, though?
So why I chose to look into celestial navigation?
Right.
Well, when I was on board my second ship, I realized that we didn't really know how to do it in the Navy, or at least I didn't. And from talking to other officers, it's not, at least a few years ago, it wasn't taught very often. So my executive officer, before he took command of Fitzgerald, he told me, you're going to do a celestial navigation transit from Guam to Okinawa.
But you're transit only on navigation and stars.
Only on celestial navigation. So we actually turned off radar on the bridge. We kept our navigation system up in combat for safety.
For safety, right.
Of course. But we turned off radar on the bridge. We turned off the navigation system up on the bridge, and only used sextants and paper charts to get across from Okinawa to Guam.
And how'd you do?
Did pretty good. It was a 1,200 nautical mile transit. When we finally brought everything back up, all of our electronic systems, we were about 4 miles off of where our actual position was.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, now this is, of course, warming my heart because one of my first jobs when I was lieutenant was navigator on a ship.
Fantastic.
We didn't have GPS. So this is an old friend of mine, actually, as well as getting up very early to get to get the morning stars.
Days working navigation.
Yeah, that's right. Get all the full day's work over and over and over again. So that's great. So, but what was your thesis associated? So you talked about celestial navigation, reintroducing it as a manual way in order to navigate when loss of GPS.
Right.
Was that what your focus was then?
So actually, I looked at celestial navigation and GPS because that's sort of like active denial. But I also looked at passive denial. So actions that an adversary may take to force us to limit the use of our own technology. For example, China and Russia are creating anti-access area denial zones, specifically like East China Sea or South China Sea.
Which means systems that prevent us from going into an area or threaten us with potential weapons that could reach out that far.
Exactly. And one of our concerns is active transmission, which would, make us vulnerable to counter detection.
What do you mean by active transmission?
Such as radar or
communications.
Communications.
Okay, sure.
Sonar.
Okay.
Basically, if it's electronic and it sends out a signal, that's an active transmission.
Okay.
So what I looked at was if target motion analysis is being taught in the Navy to officers and enlisted sailors. The reason I chose that was because I had previous experience as an ASVO, so I was a little familiar with it, which helped.
Explain a little bit what target motion analysis is.
So target motion analysis is essentially a process that uses passive sonar, so you're only receiving, to determine the bearing, range, course, and speed of a contact. Okay.
So by listening simply through one bearing, you're able to get both the course and speed and range?
Well, it's over a period of time, so there's a process you have to go through to determine that.
Okay.
But that's essentially what you get when you conduct
So it's
TMA.
another big trig problem because
Yes.
as time goes on, the angle shifts, the line of
Exactly.
bearing shifts, and you sort of, in reverse, navigate backwards to try
Sort
to
of,
figure
yeah.
out. Sort of. That's right. In fact, time motion analysis was one of the inventions of one of our past faculty members who was a retired admiral and retired here as well. So that's great that we are relearning that. So you did celestial navigation, time motion analysis, and was your focus of your thesis how we'd reintegrate that education back for our students, or for our officers?
Well, first I just wanted to examine, like, are we actually training the stuff? Because
we're actually conveying that information. Sure.
Yes. Are we?
And what'd you find?
We are. In the past few years, we've actually taken significant steps to reintegrate celestial navigation and actually increase the amount of target motion analysis that's being taught to our officers and sailors, which is great. Now we just need to make sure we're also doing it in other warfare areas as well,
Sure.
such as anti-air warfare or surface warfare.
Well, how would you do target motion analysis in surface warfare or air warfare?
For surface warfare, you would use your EW components to just
Electronic warfare?
Yes, electronic warfare.
So you can receive passive signals? Yeah.
Well, if an enemy combatant is transmitting, let's say, radar, you would receive it with essentially your giant radar detector that you have on board.
Right.
It would give you a bearing, and you could...
You use that same bearing just like you would if it was an acoustic
Exactly.
bearing as well. Okay, great. Well, let's shift a little bit more on the personal side there. You've been
Okay,
here
sir.
for how many months?
Coming up on 18.
And you're going to graduate, aren't you, this March?
Yes, sir.
Or this month?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. We're not there yet.
You got to. It depends on whether your instructors see the show or not.
Yeah.
Now, you defended your thesis, sort of thing. Well, what do you do next?
Actually, after NPS, I'm going to take a billet as staff here in Monterey.
So you're not going anywhere?
No.
So by billet, you mean job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
sir.
you've got a job at the school that you're going to do?
Yeah, I'll most likely be working down in the student services office or somewhere on staff. Not sure exactly what they're going to have me do just yet.
Probably some fun thing that.
I'm sure.
That's right. So we need a lot of help there and expertise of getting things done, and you're going to actually bring that expertise. And then after you do that for 14 months, what do you do?
I'll be going to department school in Newport, Rhode Island.
So what's a department head for a surface line officer?
So a department head is an officer who's in charge of several divisions on a ship. A division is essentially a group of sailors that specialize in one job.
Okay.
So a department head is in charge of multiple divisions.
So give me an example of a department head.
So for example, you have a weapons officer.
Okay, weapons officer.
So-
Charge all the weapon systems
Weapons
on
and,
board
and,
ship.
and the
Sure.
sailors that maintain those systems as well.
And he has those officers that are in charge of the divisions.
Yes, sir.
All right. So what do you expect to learn at department head schools to actually lead those, right?
Yes, actually lead them. Also learning tactics.
And some of the stuff you've done in your thesis.
Exactly.
Well, great. And what about the job after that? Do you know where you're going?
Not yet, sir.
So they give you orders after you go to the school?
Yes, sir. Hopefully I become an operations officer or a weapons officer.
Well, Jeff, we wish you the best of luck. We're glad you came here as a student. Always remember Monterey positively, and don't be
sir.
afraid to come back for those senior executive courses we offer sometimes. We've had Lieutenant Jeff Steiner here as our guest to represent all the student body this quarter, but we'll have more students in future shows, and I hope you tune in to YourTown television program. This is Jeff Kline, your host.